This is a student's assignment for the second psychology assignment, and I just want to demonstrate how I'm going to give feedback. So you can see I have the Word document open and I have the Review tab checked. I zoomed out down here using the zoom button, just enough so you could see any formatting changes and any comments I'd like to make. Okay, so I make a comment here. I'm just going to zoom in, see if we can get a closer look at it. In biological perspective, can you see if you can deepen the definition? Go to APA dictionary, and so then you've got this. You will probably have to Control C to copy, and then Control V paste. And then here's biological psychology, but there's also biological perspective. So I would, if you're using the, I can't see not using the biological because it applies, but you can get different definitions there, and you can summarize or use them however you wish. Okay, so it was just a suggestion there that the original definition of biological, this first one here, could be done a bit deeper. Pause there. Now, here's a link to an article about the roots of mental illness. How much of mental illness can the biology of the brain explain? Diagnosing mental illness isn't like diagnosing other chronic diseases. Heart disease is identified with the help of blood tests and electrocardiograms. Diabetes is diagnosed by measuring blood glucose levels, but classifying mental illness is a more subjective endeavour. No blood test exists for depression. No X-ray can identify a child at risk of developing bipolar disorder, at least not yet. Thanks to new tools in genetics and neuroimaging, scientists are making progress toward deciphering details of the underlying biology of mental disorders. Yet, experts disagree on how far we can push this biological model. Are mental illnesses simply physical diseases that happen to strike the brain, or do these disorders belong to a class all their own? Eric Kandel, MD, a Nobel Prize laureate and professor of brain science at Columbia University, believes it's all about biology. All mental processes are brain processes, and therefore all disorders of mental functioning are biological diseases, he says. The brain is the organ of the mind. Where else could mental illness be, if not in the brain? That viewpoint is quickly gaining supporters thanks in part to Thomas R. Insel, MD, Director of the National Institute of Mental Health, who has championed a biological perspective during his tenure at the agency. To Insel, mental illnesses are no different from heart disease, diabetes, or any other chronic illness. All chronic diseases have behavioral components as well as biological components, he says. The only difference here is that the organ of interest is the brain instead of the heart or pancreas, but the same basic principles apply. A new toolkit. Take cardiology, Insel says. A century ago, doctors had little knowledge of the biological basis of heart disease. They could merely observe a patient's physical presentation and listen to the patient's subjective complaints. Today, They can measure cholesterol levels, examine the heart's electrical impulses with EKG, and take detailed CT images of blood vessels and arteries to deliver a precise diagnosis. As a result, INSO says, mortality from heart attacks has dropped dramatically in recent decades. In most areas of medicine, we now have a whole toolkit to help us know what's going on, from the behavioral level to the molecular level. That has really led to enormous changes in most areas of medicine, he says. INSEL believes the diagnosis and treatment of mental illness is today where cardiology was 100 years ago. And, like cardiology of yesteryear, the field is poised for dramatic transformation, he says. We are really at the cusp of a revolution in the way we think about the brain and behavior, partly because of technological breakthroughs. We're finally able to answer some of the fundamental questions. Indeed, in recent years, scientists have made many exciting discoveries about the function and dysfunction of the human brain. They've identified genes linked to schizophrenia and discovered that certain brain abnormalities increase a person's risk of developing post-traumatic stress disorder after a distressing event. Others have zeroed in on anomalies associated with autism, including abnormal brain growth and underconnectivity among brain regions. Researchers have also begun to flesh out a physiological explanation for depression. Helen Mayberg, MD, a professor of psychiatry and neurology at Emory University, has been actively involved in research that singled out a region of the brain, Brodmann Area 25, that is overactive in people with depression. Mayberg describes Area 25 as a junction box that interacts with other areas of the brain involved in mood, emotion, and thinking. She has demonstrated that deep brain stimulation in the area can alleviate symptoms in people with treatment-resistant depression. Continuing with further on in the article, yet other conditions such as depression or anxiety, for other conditions such as depression or anxiety, the biological foundation is more nebulous. In other words, less strong. Often, McNally notes, mental illnesses are likely to have multiple causes, including genetic, biological, and environmental factors. Of course, that's true for many chronic diseases, heart disease, and diabetes included. But for mental illnesses, we're a particularly long way from understanding the interplay among those factors. Now, just to explain who McNally is, he's quoted in the previous text slides in this video. So, complexity of mental illness. That complexity is one reason that experts such as Jerome Wakefield, a professor of social work and psychiatry at New York University, believe that too much emphasis is being placed on the biology of mental illness at this point in our understanding of the brain. Decades of effort to understand the biology of mental disorders have uncovered clues, but those clues haven't translated to improvements in diagnosis or treatment, he believes. We've thrown tens of billions of dollars into trying to identify biomarkers and biological substrates for all mental disorders. The fact is, we've gotten very little out of that. And if you rewind back to that slide with the picture of the treatments for depression, you realize that medication is one among many. And interestingly, that the CBT and behavior modification are the two most effective. If you look at the chapter 20 in your book, it's up on Moodle for those with the earlier version. You can see in that description the kind of different treatments compared. Just want to see if there's... I would like you to finish reading that. I'm just sort of highlighting it as an interesting article, even though it's a little bit old. And I'll add this link to your Moodle page along with this video. Thanks for watching.